choice between stability and continuing instability. I mean, at least that was the claim of the Yanukovych campaign, that they would bring essentially a greater political stability, but it was really not so much the policies of the Orange coalition, but its inability to govern. I mean, if you look at the policies between Regions and Orange, they're almost identical. Both of them were for economic recovery, both of them in one way or another were closer relations with Russia or acceptable relations. Both of them were not in a hurry about NATO, so it's really hard to tell them apart. In the event, the election was won by essentially the opposition under the claim that at least they could bring more stability. I think you'd have to say that if this claim is true, stability is the precondition for reforms, because you can't move anything through the parliament or through the government if you basically are changing governments every 7 months. So, yes, the answer, obviously, America and the European Union have high hopes that some of these reforms that have been promised for, well, since Kuchma's time, are actually this year going to be delivered. That still has to happen. But clearly, the initial response to President Yanukovych's first visit to Brussels and his upcoming first visit to Washington in 2 weeks is pretty enthusiastic that finally we're going to see reforms. So I guess optimism, but no guarantees. Well, I always thought that the division of Ukrainians into those of them who are owned by Moscow and those who are in love with Europe, that was sort of like looking at America and saying they're all white hats or black hats or cowboys and Indians. It really isn't a very good description of Ukrainian politics, not now, and I don't think at any time in Ukraine's past. You know, whether you talk about the Donbass or Lvov or the Carpathians or even the Crimea, all of them are Ukrainian patriots in one way or another. They express it a little differently, but I don't think there's anybody in Ukrainian politics that is not a Ukrainian first and just a Ukrainian first. I think all of them, in their own way, with the possible exception of President Yushchenko, who was very angry with Moscow, understandably so, for most of his presidency. Yulia Tymoshenko was pursuing closer relationships with Moscow her entire time. I think Yanukovych will pursue correct, closer, but not without. Neither of them intended to lose any Ukrainian sovereignty. I also think both of them understand the future of Ukraine is closer to Europe. And even though we can't get them into European institutions today or tomorrow, both with NATO and more importantly with the European Union, both of the major parties were intending to pursue closer relationships with European markets, institutions, free trade, visa liberalization. Those are the priorities of Ukraine. Well, I think Kiev historically and today has three major policies. They have to maintain a policy towards Russia. It's critical for their energy resources, their trading balance, and also they have deep historical and cultural connections. You're not going to change those overnight. The future, as I've already said, lies in the Eastern Partnership, the free trade liberalization, and the beginning of kind of soft integration in Europe's East. The American relationship is a little more interesting. We're more cheerleaders than we really are trading partners or a political model. I think you'll see in the visit of President Yanukovych to the Nuclear Security Summit that's going to occur on the 12th and 13th of April. I think Ukraine does an awful lot for the world community on non-proliferation, of destruction of weapons-grade materials, and next to Kazakhstan, is the top has the top record of all modern states in the destruction of nuclear capabilities. So those kind of international issues, Ukraine has an increasing role to play, and I think America will recognize that. Much like our policy, President Obama's policy towards Russia, which is essentially a reset as a way of saying engagement, not on everything, which we really disagree, but on if we can find things we want to be engaged. I think that the same policy of active engagement and active diplomacy will be American policy towards Ukraine, and has been pretty much consistently since the revolution in 2004. I think we made a mistake to think that the far eastern, the post-Soviet European democracies were going to move towards Europe in exactly the same way that Poland and the Czech Republic did. Those first, Poland and the Czech Republic, had a security problem, insecurity from Germany, insecurity with the Soviet Union, which had to be corrected to allow them to return to Europe, and that was why it was NATO first. When you look at the problems of the post-Soviet states, we have an instability, a building of a nation problem. There are a lot of other challenges that come long before we get to the question of security. This is why they have chosen, and it's the correct choice, that the Eastern Partnership and the WTO and those economic things are the first things they have to do. If you're asking me when would NATO come in the process if it doesn't come first, I think we will not really know if Ukraine is pursuing a membership track for 5 or 7 years. They have said, both parties have said that NATO not now. And they've also said that the Ukrainian people would have to have a referendum as to whether they chose to pursue that. So I think we're looking for most of this decade without talking membership track. And it will not be us that tells Ukraine or Georgia that they're ready. They will tell us, much like Turkey. Turkey will decide if it's pursuing European Union integration, and Ukraine will have to decide if it's really serious about that membership goal. And they've said they need more time to make those decisions.